endorsed by the Philippine Commission on Higher Education. As such, iSITE was able to achieve its objectives in a matter of 5 years after its foundation. Most importantly, not only the students benefited, but also the universities and schools in the region. The program helped a lot of schools and students in terms of providing them with the latest seminars and trainings in various emerging topics in ITE endorsed by the Philippine. They have been exposed to hire people in the industry for networking and linkages, and even IT skills certifications. Students as well as faculty member advisors were able to see the latest gadgets and devices, such as drones and robots in advance when they participate in every event. They were able to learn about the research outputs of various school student participants. Faculty members were able to interact and share best practices with each other. Aside from fun, excitement, and prizes, students' outstanding skills in programming, creativity, and research presentations were recognized and showcased. Above all, sharing and collaborations have been developed, and self-confidence of students were proven to assist them in their future career after graduation. As there is a need to further supplement learning of many students in a third world country like the Philippines, especially that the field of IT is a fast-changing technology, IT Students Capacity Building Program was implemented to address the need. Most schools and universities in the regional part of the country need to have state-of-the-art facilities and laboratories at par to at least our neighboring ASEAN countries. Schools offering information technology education (ITE) programs are striving to keep its curriculum up to date, facilities upgraded, and learning support resources provided to all its students. However, not all schools and universities in the region can provide the needed learning resources to students, as well as linkages to relevant industries of the programs. Hence, iSITE, Integrated Southern Tagalog Information Technology Education, developed this program. To date, there are more than 2,000 student members and 80 higher educational institutions as institutional members in the region. This program provided industry-aligned and timely seminars, trainings, and conferences to students taking ITE programs in the region, addressing the needs of universities as well as the needs of many small schools in the region. Big schools and universities, and those with higher level of accreditation, local and international, and Center of Development and Excellence in IT Education, are extending their resources and facilities to help other schools through the program. In addition, it also promotes a research sharing and collaborations by allowing students to present their theses and capstone as research outputs to other students from various universities for utilization and potential commercialization. Also, the seminars and trainings provided by experts in the industry develop the IT skills of the students that equip them to compete in several programming and IT skills competition in the regional and national levels. iSITE is an organization for IT students formed by the deans from 8 different universities in Region 4A, Calabarzon, Philippines, to boost the IT skills of students from more than 200 universities, offering IT education programs such as computer science, information technology, information systems, and computer engineering. iSITE is the only recognized organization by the Commission on Higher Education in the field of IT education in the region. Its event is always a much-awaited one, since pool of speakers are coming from relevant industries in the field and well-known academicians in the country. In order to address the need for knowledge of students from the very fast-changing technology, iSITE conducted 2 to 3 conferences and seminars in a year, and the annual iSITE Regional Research Conference and Presentation, IT Education, IRR-SITE, and IT competitions endorsed by the Philippine Commission on Higher Education. As such, iSITE was able to achieve its objectives in a matter of 5 years after its foundation. Most importantly, not only the students benefited, but also the universities and schools in the region. The program helped a lot of schools and students in terms of providing them with the latest seminars and trainings in various emerging topics in ITE. They have been exposed to people in the industry for networking and linkages, and even IT skills certifications. Students as well as faculty member advisors were able to see the latest gadgets and devices, such as drones and robots in advance when they participate in every event. They were able to learn about the research outputs of various school student participants. Faculty members were able to interact and share best practices with each other. Aside from fun, excitement, and prizes, students' outstanding skills in programming, creativity, and research presentations were recognized and showcased. Above all, sharing and collaborations have been developed, and self-confidence of students were proven to assist them in their future career after graduation. As there is a need to further supplement learning of many students in a third world country like the Philippines, especially that the field of IT is a fast-changing technology, IT Students Capacity Building Program was implemented to address the need. Most schools and universities in the regional part of the country need to have state-of-the-art facilities and laboratories at par to at least our neighboring ASEAN countries. Schools offering information technology education (ITE) programs are striving to keep its curriculum up to date, facilities upgraded, and learning support resources provided to all its students. However, not all schools and universities in the region can provide the needed learning resources to students, as well as linkages to relevant industries of the programs. Hence, iSITE, Integrated Southern Tagalog Information Technology Education, developed this program. To date, there are more than 2,000 student members and 80 higher educational institutions as institutional members in the region. This program provided industry-aligned and timely seminars, trainings, and conferences to students taking ITE programs in the region, addressing the needs of universities as well as the needs of many small schools in the region. Big schools and universities, and those with higher level of accreditation, local and international, and Center of Development and Excellence in IT Education, are extending their resources and facilities to help other schools through the program. In addition, it also promotes a research sharing and collaborations by allowing students to present their theses and capstone as research outputs to other students from various universities for utilization and potential commercialization. Also, the seminars and trainings provided by experts in the industry develop the IT skills of the students that equip them to compete in several programming and IT skills competition in the regional and national levels.
Good afternoon, dear iSITE student members, and to all of you, dear faculty advisors. Welcome again to our iSITE webinar series. As usual, we will fill your Saturday with informative and substantial updates on the latest and emerging topics focused on information and communication technology. Thank you for rising up to the challenge of this new academic landscape. Today, we have again another interesting topic entitled IPV4 Subnetting, an introduction, and how does it work? For privacy, by participating in our iSITE webinar series, you can send us to capture, record, process data you shared directly and indirectly on this event. For the guidelines, to ensure the smooth flow of our webinar, please be guided of the following. This session will be recorded for documentation purposes. For best user experience, use Google Chrome browser for desktop and Zoom app for mobile. Only the speaker's microphone and video camera shall be turned on. For those in the Zoom account, use our chat box for your questions and also for your suggestions. But those who are live in FB, please type your questions in the comment section. It will be read later faculty and student attendees could apply the knowledge and conceptualization that you gain in this webinar in the development for. So, dear participants, at the end of the at the end of this webinar, a link to the evaluation form will be posted, and you have to fill them out to receive your e-certificate. Please write your name correctly, and thank you. Moving on, to give her open remarks, may we hear it from our president of iSITE, Dr. Rosalie B. Alday, the Dean of the College of Computer Studies of Lyceum of the Philippines, University, Batangas.
Good afternoon, everyone. In behalf of the iSITE officers and board members, as well as our CHED Region 4 supervisor, we welcome you all to our 7th webinar, or the second to the last of the first set of free webinar series, to all iSITE members and non-members as well, as we are posting all past webinars in YouTube. These pre-webinars is our way of giving back the blessing that we had received for the past years. And this is to give back to all the members part of our award as ABET Innovation Awardee 2020, which we received last October 31, 2020 from Baltimore, USA. Hope that we will have the resources to continue with keeping you updated with the new trends in information technology and computer science fields, and this would have not been possible if not for the support of all iSITE officers who had been the resource speakers to share their expertise for free. We hope that all will be safe and healthy wherever you are, and happy learning everyone, and enjoy our topic for this afternoon. With that, good afternoon again, and God bless everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alday. And today, this afternoon, it is indeed our honor and pride that we're given full support by our CHED Region 4 supervisor, iSITE. To inspire us this afternoon, may I call on camera for his inspirational message, Mr. Lepel Guetta. Let us give him a virtual round of applause.
Good afternoon, iSITE officers, headed by Dr. Rosalie Alday, iSITE members, student participants, school representatives. I would like to continuously express my gratitude and commend Dr. Rosalie Alday for this continuous service to IT students in Calabarzon. Also, I would like to congratulate her in her 15 years of his public service through iSITE, alongside with other iSITE officers that are also officers of iSITE. Your services in helping the IT Academy to its pursuit of quality education is not unnoticed by the Commission. This pandemic is not a hindrance to iSITE in delivering this series of webinars to the students. This afternoon sessions, IPV4 Subnetting, an introduction and how does it work. This is one of the needed topics for you as future local area network administrators, systems administrators, network engineers, and as a faculty that shares knowledge to the students. you should give attention in implementing this network system to an organization. Subnetting is a term usually mentioned in networking. Yes, because it deals with IP addressing, sub-networking, among others, especially in a large organization. However, subnetting is not merely networking. It is also used widely in security. In the advent of DHCPs and BYODs, the automatic connection of devices increased the vulnerability of the network systems. This easy connectivity became a conduit to those who would want to infiltrate the target network or system. But the implementation of IP addressing and subnetting, a LAN administrator can implement whitelisting that prohibits entry to the target network. Subnetting also allows us to segment our network into smaller chunks to limit the broadcast domains or to establish different security domains to isolate traffic from one another. For example, a system that is running on administrative system or information system Wi-Fi and a guest Wi-Fi that needs to use the same internet connection. However, we need the traffic to be isolated so that our guests can reach our internal servers, won't reach the internal server, and the users don't have unrestricted access to the internet. Well, this and more when Dr. Ribong discusses this topic. Sit back and relax. Listen carefully to this very interesting series of free webinar offered by the Integrated Southern Tagalog Association of Information Technology. Welcome to this webinar. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Sir Lupel, for your untimed support to iSITE. Thank you, thank you, thank you, sir. Now we will proceed to the most important part of this event. The highlights of this afternoon webinar is a talk entitled IP v4 Subnetting, an introduction and how does it work? Let me introduce to you our guest speaker for today. Our speaker for today is the current Vice President for Academic Affairs of Colegio de San Juan de Letran. She was the former president of the Philippine Society of IT Educators, Region 4, and the former president of the Institute of Computer Engineers of the Philippines, or IPV4. I think he is in Region 4 and also in National. She became also the Dean of the College of Computer Studies of Colegio de San Juan de Letran, conducted several talks and a lot of talks. And she has big experience when it comes to computer networking. Without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Corazon B. Rebong.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will be sharing to you my screen. Good afternoon once again, dear colleagues, students. I will be discussing the topic IPV4 subnetting, an introduction and how does it work. At the end of this webinar, the participants will be able to explain IPv4 addressing and identify network addressing such as IP address, subnet mask, network address, host address, broadcast address, IP address types, and IP classes in detail. To explain what subnetting is and understand why it is necessary in computer network. To explain the subnetting concepts and describe the terms such as network ID, network host ID, broadcast ID, total host, valid host, power of 2. To explain what VLSM subnetting is and be able to perform how it is done step by step, including differences between FLSM subnetting and VLSM subnetting. And lastly, of course, to solve and apply the FLSM and VLSM subnetting examples for Cisco exams and job interviews in the future. We now define IP address. It is uniquely identify each device on an IP network. We have here illustrate a network. We can have here the public IP address assigned in each device and another private IP addresses assigned to each devices in an internal network. Every IP address consists of two parts. We have network address, or what we call the network ID or network field, and the host ID or the host field. We have the format or an IP address. An IP address is a 32-bit binary number, usually represented as decimal values, each representing 8 bits, with an illustration here as shown. And it's also separated in a decimal points as known as the dotted binary notation. As mentioned, each octet or byte can be converted to decimal ranging from 0 to 255, as illustrated here. And it is also separated in a decimal points as known as the dotted decimal notation. With this illustration or formats, we have to review our conversion skills in computing binary to decimal number conversion. Let's start with that one. I have here the IP address conversion example based on what we have illustrated in the previous slide. First is the 172, how this 172 converted or from binary number. As illustrated, just add all the decimal values with its corresponding binary value of 1. First, the 128. Next, the 32 plus 8 plus 4 is 172. I hope you still remember your fundamentals in number-based conversion. And likewise, on the next binary conversion to decimal, 8 here. May I use the pen? Wait for. Okay. 8 here. Next is the 64. The 64 here based on the decimal value on the binary coded decimal. And lastly is the 33. 32 plus 1 is 33. We have illustrated the format, and now we proceed to the IPv4 address classes. We have 5 different IP address classes, A to E, but we illustrate this using this table based on class, first octet decimal range, first octet high order bits, network or host ID, next is the network or the number of networks. Then next is the host per network. Let's first discuss class A. In a class A, we have a decimal range from 1 to 126 and a bit first octet high order bit is 0, and the network and host field with the first octet is only network. Then the second and the fourth octets represent the host field. While the subnet mask or default subnet mask for class A is 255.0.0.0, and the total number of networks under this class is 126, derived from 2 to the 7th minus 2 is 128 minus 2 is 126. These reserved numbers denote that it is reserved for network and the broadcast. Similarly, on the host per network, we have 16,777,214 in Class A. Imagine that number of hosts available in one or maybe more or networks identified in Class A. Next one is Class B. For a Class B, the first octet decimal range after Class A is 128 to 191, with the first octet high order bits is 1 and 0, with 2 network fields and 2 host fields. If you can see the difference between the Class A and Class B in terms of IDs. For a default subnet mask, we have 255.255.0.0, while the number of networks in Class B is 16,382, and its host per network or usable addresses is 65,534. Next one is Class C. In Class C, we started the network address at 192 to 223 with a high bit order of 110, and take note that the host and network bits or IDs becomes 3 and 1 for the host, while the default subnet mask is 255.255.255.0, and the total number of networks for Class C 2,097,150, and each network has 254 usable addresses. That's why Class A is dedicated for a big or large organization. B is for medium class or medium size organization, and while C is for small size organization. So as I mentioned, there are 5. So how about D? So class D addresses 224 to 239 are reserved addresses for multicasting, while Class E from 240 to 254 are reserved numbers for experimental or used for research. Okay, so moving on, if you notice on the next slide, we have encircled 1 to 126. What have you noticed in this number? Since, as mentioned, the dotted decimal or the decimal value range is started from 0 and end with the 255. Why in this, for Class A, we don't have 0? Okay, so for this purpose, the address 0, no, /24 and the 127/24 are reserved numbers. The 0/24 is an IP address but non-routable IPv4 address with several uses, primarily as a default or placeholder. While 127/24 is reserved for loopback or the local host address. This loopback address is managed entirely by and within the operating system. With these special addresses or reserved address, so we have another or some of the reserved special addresses with this. We have here again the 0, okay, or /8 to /24 for software, as mentioned earlier. No, it's reserved for or not valid address, only for as valid source address, while the 10.0.0.0/8 is a private network, no, used for communication within a private network. The 100.64.0.0/10 is a private network also that used for shared address space for communication between a service provider and its subscriber when using a carrier grade NAT. While the 127.0.0.0/8 or host is used for loopback addresses to the local address. Next one is the 169.254.0.0/16. It's a subnet used for link local addresses between hosts on a single link when no IP address is otherwise specified, such as would have normally been retrieved from a DHCP server, while the 172.16.0.0 is a private network used for local communication within a private network. The 192.0.0.0/24 is also a private network but used in IETF protocol assignments, and 192.0.2.0/24 is for documentation assigned as testnet 1 documentation and example. There's a lot more here specified in the reserve or special addresses or special blocks. But please take note that we have special address reserved for Class A, Class B, and Class C that uses in a private IP address or in a private network. And these are 10.0.0.0 for Class A, the 172.16.0.0 for class B, and 192.168.0.0 for class C. Moving on, we have now in our subnetting. I hope that the introduction or the review of your fundamentals in networking and conversion should also be able to capture what we have been used in networking. So let's proceed to the subnetting. Why do the subnetting? Imagine that we have this illustration of finding an address or a house in a whole town. So since subnetting is a process of dividing a single large network in multiple smaller networks, in this single large network is just like a town without any sector and street address. In such a town, a postman may take 3 to 4 days in finding a single address. Imagine you have this town with no address, okay? While if town is divided in sector or street, he can easily find any address in less than an hour. Similarly to our computer networks, as follows, as the same concept. If we have a 1,000 user without applying the subnetting, all devices share the same bandwidth. All devices share the same broadcast domain, and it is difficult to apply a security policy, as mentioned a while ago by Sir Lupel, that subnetting is a very important role in securing our network. Imagine that in Class A, we have 16,777,214, as mentioned earlier and or as illustrated. Imagine that if we don't apply subnetting in 16 million addresses, how can we apply the security policy? Similar with Class B of 65,534 usable host addresses. While in Class C, we have 254 usable host addresses. Moving on, we have here what is subnetting. As mentioned, it is a process of dividing a large IP network into a smaller IP networks. In subnetting, we create multiple small, manageable networks for a single network. So first, we have here the first network or network 1. We divide it into a different network and another one for network end or end network. Based on this analogy, we have to know different terminologies that we are going to use while we are having our subnetting. The network address is an IP address, identifier for a node or host on a telecommunications network. Network addresses are designed to be unique identifiers across the network. Although some networks allow for local private addresses or locally administered addresses that may not be unique. It is also a reserved address in a network. Subnetwork address, a portion of a network that shares a particular subnet address. Host address, the physical address of a computer in a network or the internet, a host address is the IP address of the machine. While usable host is a valid host address, means no broadcast address and no subnet address can be used. While broadcast address is a reserved IP address that is used to target all systems on a specific subnetwork instead of single hosts. In other words, broadcast address allows information to be sent to all machines on a given subnet rather than a specific machine. While default broadcast address is the last IP address in a network. Take note, the last IP address. Similar to subnet, broadcast address is the last subnet in a subnet work address. While subnet mask is a 32-bit number created by setting host bits to all zeros and setting network bits to all ones. Please remember that as we go along with the computation of getting the subnet mask. Take note that all bits in a host must be zeros and network bits must be 1. In this way, the subnet masks separate the IP address into the network and host addresses. A subnet mask is used to divide an IP address into two parts. One part identifies the host or the computer, and the other part identifies the network on which it belongs. While the default subnet mask is a subnet mask separates the IP address into the network and host addresses based on the IP address classes as defined earlier in the table of the different classes as shown earlier. To discuss further the subnet mask, as mentioned, this is a 32-bit value that defines which bits of the IP address in the network field. Every bit in the mask that is set to 1 indicates a bit in the network field. Like example, a network mask of 255.255.0.0 indicates that the first 16 bits from the network field and form the network field, and the rest of the bits are in the host fields. The mask is often written in this form, the /16, /24, /30, or also known as the slash notation. Thus, the mask 255.255.0.0 could also be written as /16. Take note of that each octet has 8 bits plus 8, 16. That's why we have here /16, and all network fields must be 1 to get the subnet mask. All ones in an octet of binary notation is 255 in decimal. So that's why we have here 255.255.0.0. Although sometimes called a subnet mask, the mask does not distinguish between the bits of the original network field and the bits of the borrow subnet bits. We will describe that later as we go along with the computation of the FLSM and the VLSM subnetting. Usually, when configuring the IP or the IP address of a network interface, you also specify the network mask or the subnet mask. So, what a subnet mask does? So, it tells the router what number of bits to look at when routing, defines the number of bits that are significant, and used as a measuring tool, not to hide anything. So please remember this part of the discussion, the octet values of the subnet mask. All networks require a subnet mask. So how we will be able to compute or to get the subnet mask based on the bits borrowed. We have here the host ID or the eligible host that can be borrowed in a network, okay, or in an IP address. If we borrowed 1 bit based on this decimal notation, we have here 1. 2 bits, or rather 1 is 128 in decimal. If we borrow 2 bits, 128 plus 28 plus 64 plus 32 is 224, and the rest is follows. So similarly, if, as mentioned earlier, if all network bits are 1, we have 255 decimal value. Okay, so we are now in the network or IP address fields. As mentioned earlier, IP address is divided into 2 parts and different IP addresses. But what this color represents to the address field. In this blue color represent the default reserved network bits. For class A, we have 8. Class B, we have 16. Class C, we have 24. While another bits reserved for subnetting eligible bits for class A, we have here class A, class B, and class C. While the last 2 bits are reserved fields for default reserve host field for broadcast. Okay. Now, we go to identifying the subnetting eligible host bits per class. For class A, from the 32 bits or total bits, we subtracted the 8 default reserved network bits and the default reserve host bits to get the 22 subnetting eligible bits. So therefore, we have 22 eligible host bits that can be borrowed. But in a class A or in all classes, we set that the minimum number of bits that can be borrowed is or are 2 host bits. 2 to the 4 is 4 subnetwork addresses and minus the 2 reserved addresses from the network and the broadcast address. So we have only 2 usable subnets. Later on, as we go through the discussion, we will more understand why we have a minimum of 2. Why not we cannot borrow only 1 bit in a host. Okay. So for maximum bits that can be borrowed, for class A, we have, as mentioned, we have 24 bits minus the 2 reserve host bits. We only have 22 eligible host bits. And for class A, we will be able to have the usable subnet addresses of 4,194,304. Imagine that number of addresses available or network or company that can be provided in class A. Excuse me. How about for class B? What are the eligible host bits for class B? So as same with the class A, we subtracted the total number of bits from the default reserved network bits and the default reserve host bits to get our eligible host bits that can be borrowed. But as mentioned, we have two minimum bits that can be borrowed in a host to have a two usable network address or addresses. Maximum bits in class B is only 14 because again, we still observe the two reserved host bits for network and broadcast address. For 14 usable or eligible host, we will have the 16,384 minus 2 reserve, 16,382 usable subnet address. That's why it belongs or it can provide to a middle or medium organization. While in Class C, we only have 6 eligible subnet or eligible host bits. As mentioned again, sorry for this typo. The Class C, it has a minimum also of 2 bits borrowed to have the 2 usable subnet address, and the maximum bits that can be borrowed, as mentioned, 6 from 8 host bits minus 2 reserved host bits, and can have 62 usable subnet address. Okay. How about the number of possible subnets and hosts for a Class A network? So we know that in Class A, we only have one network ID and 3 host IDs. And each host ID has 8 bits. Okay? We have to determine the number of possible subnets that represent this 2 to the S, which S represents the number of bits borrowed here, and based on the host field. Okay, and S represent this number to get the number of possible subnets. 2 raised to 1 is equal to 2. And the rest will follow. 2 raised to 2 is 4. 2 raised to 3 is 8. Or as simple as multiply it by 2. 2 multiplied by 2, 4. 4 multiplied by 2, 8. 16, 32 until you reach 256 for the 8 bits. Okay? And now we proceed to the number of bits remaining in a host. In Class A, we know that there are 24 bits here. Okay? To derive the number of bits remaining in a host, we have 24 subtract to the number of bits borrowed. Okay, so here the total number is 24. Okay, then how can we compute this 23? So basically from here, 24 minus S, which is here, which is this one, and total number is 23. Okay, and that would be represented as the host or H in this case. Then the rest will follow to get all the number of bits remaining in host. Okay. How about number of possible hosts per subnet? So from here, 2 raised to h minus 2 is to derive the number of possible hosts per subnet. Okay, how this 8,388,606 were derived, or was derived rather. So from 2 to the 23rd is 8,388,608 minus 2 is 8,388,606, and the rest will follow. Okay, so based on the number of bits, okay, that we are borrowing. So since we know that there are 24 bits in class A, but take note that we have maximum bits of 22 only. So this is to represent why we cannot borrow 23 and 24 bits, because we only have here in the number of bits remaining is 1. And if we get the possible host per subnet, becomes 0. From 2 to the 1 is 2, minus 2, the reserve, is 0. So therefore, we don't have the possible host per subnet that can be used if we borrow 23 bits, similar to the 24 bits. That's why in class A, we only have 22 maximum bits that can be borrowed. Okay. Next one is class B. In an earlier discussion, we have illustrated that class B has 2 network fields and 2 host fields. Okay, similar computation as presented in class B. Now we derive the number of possible subnets based on this illustration, and the number of remaining bits in a host based on this formula. Okay, and similarly to the number of possible hosts per subnet with this formula. And we have here the complete table for the possible subnets for and host for a class B network. Okay, so we have 16. That's why, as mentioned, we have to only have 14 maximum bits that can be borrowed in class B to have usable host per subnet. Okay, with class C, we have only 8. Okay, we have only 8 bits in a host field. So as mentioned, only 6 bits borrowed, no? Only 6, no, can be borrowed, or maximum of 6 bits can be borrowed to have 2 usable hosts per subnet. Okay, so there are 2 types of subnetting. So we have the fixed length subnet mask subnetting, or the VLS, and the VLSM, or variable length subnet mask subnetting. So what are the differences between the two? So in FLSM subnetting, all subnets are equal in size. All subnets have equal number of hosts. All subnets use same subnet mask. It is easy in configuration and administration. It wastes a lot of IP addresses. It also known as classful subnetting. It supports both classful and classless routing, while in VLSM, subnets are variable in size. It can be 100 user in a network. It can be 50 in a network. Subnet have variable number of hosts. Subnets uses different subnet mask. It is complex in configuration and administration. It wastes minimum IP addresses. It also known as classless subnetting, and it supports only classless routing protocols. All of this will be illustrated in our example later. Okay, so now we first illustrate the FLSM subnetting. In this example, for class A, we have this scenario. your company has applied for and received a Class A network address of 10.0.0.0. You want to divide your physical address, your physical network, into 100 subnets, which will be interconnected by routers. So determine the number of bits you will need to borrow from the host portion of the network address, and then the number of bits left from host addresses and the subnet mask. To illustrate that solution, we have here the network address 10.0.0.0, and to illustrate the fields, we only have one network field and 3 host fields. We will be using the binary notation of getting the equivalent number of possible subnets. In this illustration, we have here bits borrowed. If we borrowed 2 bits, we only have 4 subnets, while our requirements is to have 100 subnets. 2 to the 3 is 8, 2 to the 4 is 16, 2 to the 5th is 32, so 2 to the 6 is 64, and 2 to the 7 is 128. Though 128 is more than the 100 subnets required, but before 128, it's only 164. So it's not possible to use the 64, no, because we will not address the requirement of your company. So therefore, then the bits or the number you are requiring is the 128 decimal notation with the 7 bits borrowed. Okay. So to illustrate that, so since the eligible host is H1, to have the 7 bits borrowed. Okay? So in this scenario, H1 will become your N2. And 2 to the 7th is equal to 128 subnets minus 2 reserve is equal to 126 subnets addresses. So since we borrowed 7 here, we still have 1 bit for usable hosts. And H2 still have 8 bits. H3 has 8 bits also, total of 17 bits. And that would be 131,072 addresses minus 2 reserve addresses. We can use 131,070 usable hosts per subnet. Okay, so we determine already the number of bits, no, that we borrowed, so 7. And what is our subnet mask? We determine the number of bits left, which is 17, to determine the total number of usable hosts. And what about the subnet mask? How can we solve the subnet mask? Based again on bits borrowing using this table, so we have mentioned that we borrowed 7 bits. Okay, so from the 7 bits, so the 7 bits, take note that the subnet mask definition, as earlier mentioned, all network fields must be 1. So all network fields must be 1 here, and 2 is 7 here, so must be 1, and host is 0. So since we have here 1 bit, so this will represent as the host 1, host 2, and host 3. Okay, so we have 254 decimal value in this second octet, and 00 for the unused host bits. Okay. Okay. So that would be the first example. Let's go now to the second scenario with a different requirement. So your company has applied a similar scenario in example number 1. What you want to derive here is to complete the table. So here is the table. So how we can able to identify the network address or subnetwork address with incremental value, and the host decimal range addresses with incremental value of this H1, H2, and H3, and the subnet broadcast for each subnetwork. We will be using the computation that we derived earlier. So in H1, as mentioned, there are 2 usable hosts. For H2, 256, and for H3, we have 254. Since we have network address of 10.0.0.0, the first usable host range is 10.0.0.1 up to 10.1.255.254, and the last number as mentioned to define the broadcast address is the last number in a network or a subnetwork, the 10.1.255.255. How this range were derived. So basically, from this solution, H1, so this is your H1, you have 2 user, the 0 and the 1, while in H2, you have 0 to 255 is 256 usable hosts, while in the last octet, the H3 has 254 from 1 to 254. Okay, so to get the next subnet address with the increment value of 2, we are referring to H1. So here, as shown in this table, we have increment this H1 to by 2, 2, 4, 8, 16. How about if you notice the subnet 100? Okay, so another example, I will be giving to you the scenario on how to get the subnet identified network. Okay, so from here, as mentioned, increment of 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, similar to this. Okay, and the rest ay pattern na po. So the rest are patterns. Okay, now, as mentioned, another scenario for Class A. As an IT staff, your network administrator assigned you to give the subnet 535 to the accounting department, and you need, to provide the following: the number of bits you borrowed, and provide the subnetwork address, usable host range, subnet broadcast, and the subnet mask based on the Class A private address with the class full prefix length of 20. Okay, so the given scenario is that subnet 535 and the /20 of a subnet mask. How? Okay, so in this solution, you have here the class A 10.0.0.0/20. Okay, may I use the, okay. Then here you have define the fields. So in class A, we have one network and 3 host fields. Okay. So for network, you have 8 bits, another 8 bits for H1, and another 4 bits to get the /20 or the 20 bits. Then that H1 become network 2 since all bits in H1 are being borrowed, while in H2, half of the bits were borrowed as N3 or network 3 as illustrated here. So these are the total bits being borrowed. Therefore, 2 to the 12, you have 4,096 total subnets. Okay? While the remaining host, based on this illustration, we have H2, 4 bits, remaining bits, 2 to the 4 is 16 usable hosts, while in H3, you have 8 bits, remaining bits, or 0 borrowed. So 2 to the 8 is 256 minus 2 is 254 with a total usable bits of 12 host bits, or 2 raised to 12 is 4,096 host minus 2 is 4,094 total usable host per subnet. Okay, you already have your usable host and number of subnets. How about the subnet mask? How will we be able to compute? Similarly, on the previous examples, we have here the number of bits borrowed and the subnet mask. For class A, to illustrate that all bits being borrowed become network. So here, network. So first octet, network, second octet, and the third octet has 4 network bits and host bits, and the fourth octet has 8 bits. So to represent in binary notation that all network field must be 1 to get the subnet mask, we have here 8 bits for first octet, another 8 bits for the second octet, and another 4 bits for the third octet, with a total of 20 bits of subnet mask. While the representation of host field should be 0. So in octet number 3, we have 4 host fields. So therefore, these are zeros. And the last octet have 8 bits, so 8 zeros. So therefore, to convert this binary number to decimal, all bits 8 is 255. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry po. Okay. So 255, while the 4 bits is 240. And since no bits being borrowed in H4 or H3 rather, 0 siya. Therefore, our subnet mask for this scenario is 255.240.0. Next one is the conversion of 535 to get the subnet 535. Take note of that given the subnet number 535, we convert it to binary to get the subnet address and even the host range and the broadcast address. Given here is the scenario of converting the bits, no, from 535. Okay. Okay. So we have 12 bits borrowed. So we count here the bits 1 to 12 and the decimal value from right to left. Okay, so 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, and 248. As mentioned, to convert decimal value to binary, we will be using the binary coded decimal. So here, so 535 minus 512 is 23. So therefore, we already used the 512. Okay. So when we encountered or when we are using the binary coded decimal, the binary value will become 1. Okay, so the remaining bits, or rather the remaining decimal value is 23. What number is nearest to 23? So 56 is not, 128, no, 64, no, 32, no, 16 is nearest to 23. So therefore, we will use 16. So 23 minus 16 is 7. Therefore, we put 1 under the 16 bit. Okay, the rest, 7 minus 4, so 4, then 3 minus 2, 1, okay, 1, then 1 minus 1, 0. So therefore, these are the bits being borrowed with this scenario. So therefore, all bits that were not used become zeros. So take note of that these are the conversion of the 535 decimal. Now, we will now proceed to the conversion by field. As mentioned earlier, we have 12 bits borrowed, as illustrates here. We have 8 bits in H1 and 4 bits in H2. So to illustrate the conversion of getting the specific subnet addresses and the usable host and broadcast under the subnet 535, we convert the number of bits being borrowed. From this illustration, okay, convert this from H1, which is 8 bits. So here, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 for H1. Okay, while the H2 is 0, 1, 1, 1. And the remaining bits in host field that were not being borrowed still becomes 0. Okay, so 0. So therefore, we are now ready to convert the first octet to decimal and the second octet in decimal values. Okay, so in first octet, we have 32. 32 plus 1 is 33. While in second octet, we have 64 plus 32 plus 16, we have 112 decimal. So therefore, we have the subnet address network of 10.33.112.0 for subnet 535. How about the range of usable host addresses? Okay, so we have the first usable host 10.33.112.1, while the last usable host is the last range of 10.33.126.254, and the broadcast address for this subnet is 10.33.126.255. I hope you get it, the examples of the fixed length subnet mask subnetting. Okay, if you have questions, later on we will having our open forum, and of course, after this discussion, we have a short quiz that also have prizes await you, given by iSITE, of course. No? Now, we proceed to variable length subnet mask. Okay, so subnet are in size. Okay, subnet have variable number of hosts, can be 10, 100, etc. Okay, subnets are different subnet mask. So to illustrate this example, we have here a scenario. Example, do the VLSM of the following network or departments from 192.168.50.0/24. We have a requirement for surfing laboratory 1 of 100 users, the register department for 50 users, and the accounting department for 10 users. So basically, we need to have the prefix length for each requirement. So what octet are we going to use, or were the eligible hosts found, and how many bits or decimal value that will increment to get the number of addresses per subnet. The network address, sorry for the misspelled, subnet mask, the first usable address, the last usable address, and the broadcast address. We have here a scenario. Okay, so first for the surfing lab, we have the 100 users. Okay, so in computing the VLSM subnetting, we start from the biggest number of user. Okay, so we need to have 100 users. So the nearest decimal value is 128. So we all know that 192.168.50.0 is a class C address. So we have 8 bits, but we have 6 eligible bits. From there, we can have our binary decimal value of 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. Okay, so 2, 4, 6, 8. Sorry for this. Okay, so we have 128 and slash 25. So the prefix length is slash 25 from the 4-octet, and the increment value here is 128. Okay, so defines that 128 users per network. However, you only have 100 required users. So your network address here is the 192.168.50.0, and your subnet mask is 255.255.255.128 based on the number of bits being borrowed for this scenario. Okay? So, or being used for this scenario. So, since we have 1 bit, so 25, diba? We have 24 here, plus 1 bit in H1. So we have 25. If we used or we borrowed 1 bit, we have 128 decimal value. So the first usable address for this network is 192.168.50.1. And the last number, since we only have 128 and reserve the 0 to add network address and the last number to broadcast address, we have 126 for the last usable address. Okay? How about for 50? So since we have requirement of a 50, no, class C IP address from registrar department, we have here the 50. So covered under the 64, no, decimal value or slash 26 to get our 50 users. So the prefix length is 26 from the 8 bits of the host field under the class C. We use the 2 bits of class C host field ID. Okay, now we have the increment of 64. So based on this increment value, so the next IP address increased to 128. So from here, 0 to 128. Okay, so and you can use also as reference the last address based on the subnet broadcast. 127 plus 1 is 128 for the next usable address. Okay, so as network address for this scenario is 192.168.50.128. And the subnet mask, as mentioned, we use the 2 bits, no, the 25 and the 25th bits. So 128 plus 64 is 192. Then our first usable address, so from here, the 128, the first is 129, and the last, so plus, no, plus the IP address of the 64, okay, minus 2, okay, the 60. So for this scenario, we have 192. address. Okay, then the next one is plus 128, sorry, 200, 191, then 129. Okay, next is the 10. Okay, so we have here plus 64. Okay, the increment of value is 64. So 128 plus 64 is 192. So basically, based on this last IP address in a subnet broadcast of 192, we increase by 1 to get also the 192. So aside from the incremental, we also use the reference as the broadcast address for the next IP address. Okay, while the subnet mask for this, since we have the /28, okay, we used no 4 additional, or we use the host bits borrowed, okay, the 4 bits borrowed. So when we use the 4 bits, or when we borrowed 4 bits, we have the subnet mask of 240. Okay, while the first usable address is the next address after the network. So 192 to 193 as the first usable subnet. While the next, or the last usable address is 206, and the subnet broadcast address is 207. If the administrator is looking for the next IP available for other department, we will be using the next IP address of 192.168.50.208 based on the incremental value and the last value in the subnet broadcast. So 192 plus 16 is 208, and here based dito 207 plus 1 is also 208. Okay, so that's it for the computation, the sample computation for the subnetting using the FLSM and the VLSM subnetting. So I have here some questions. For you to be able to answer this, you may type your answer in the chat box in YouTube or here in Zoom. Ma'am Rose?
Yes, ma'am. Ako magbabantay sa sagot.
Okay po. So the first question is, I think cash to through GCash, right, Ma'am Rose?
Meron ba?
Sige,
Meron?
para sa'yo, 100.
Okay, 100. We have 5 questions. So, here. So first, as a review, identify the IP address class for this scenario. 1 is 135.78.2.0. Number 2, 183.67.8.0 and 200.6.8.0. So what class this IP address belong? Okay, you have okay. Next question. So identify network address, host address, subnet address, and broadcast address based on the given IP addresses. 4, 201.7.9.0, 5, 183.67.255.255, 6, 255, sorry, 255 yun dot 0, dot 0, and 7, 10.0.0.1. So this is 255. Sorry for the typo error. Okay. So one answer will be for this question, another answer for this question. And next question is, find the prefix length for the following subnet mask. Find the prefix length of the following subnet mask. So this is the third question, number 8255.255.0.0. Fourth question is 255.255.248.0. And number 10, 255.255.254 subnet mask. I hope that you learn from this webinar. Thank you very much and have a good day. So, God bless us all.
Okay, Ma'am Cory, tingnan natin kung tama yung mga sagot.
Apo.
Christine Iris Castillo
Wait lang,
answered number 1, Class B.
Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, for number 2, si Iris uli, Class B.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
And for number 3, tama ba na parehong Class B, 1 and 2?
Yes, ma'am. Dapat isang tao lang yung sumagot noon.
Okay, so I'll choose another one. Dan Julius Vargas. Ay, mali. Class C ang sagot. Tama. So number 2, walang tumama sa number 2. Number 3 is Class C.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there are 2 winners. Christine Iris Castillo.
No, one question.
Yes.
Tatlong answer yon. Yung 1 to 3, isang question lang po yon.
Yung 1 to 3, isang question lang.
Apo.
So number 1 is B, number 2 is B, number 3 is C.
Is C. Yes, ma'am. So wala tayong nanalo.
C.
BBC.
Meron. Christine Iris Castillo.
Okay. So can we get the GCash number of Miss Christine? You may,
Okay.
ma'am, no, ma'am?
Message here.
Okay. Number 2.
For number 2.
Number 4 is host and network address for Class C.
Ang sagot lang niya, number 4 is network.
Okay, ma'am. Network. Okay po.
So that is Dan Julius Vargas.
Number 5, ma'am. Subnet mask.
Number 5.
Broadcast, sorry. Broadcast address.
Wala.
Wala.
Wala po.
Number 6, subnet mask.
Wala din. So we have 2 winners.
Number 7, host address.
Wala din. So
wala.
the 2 winners, ilagay ko na lang sa chat group that they have to send me their GCash number.
Okay, and the last question, ma'am, for the prefix. Wala, may nagsagot ba, ma'am?
Anong number? Number ano yun?
8.
Wala.
Number 9, wala din, ma'am.
Wala din.
Number 10.
Number 10, ang sagot niya is /29.
/29. Ika lang, ma'am. Ay, naku, nag-error ng aking computer.
May nagsagot din ng
Yes,
number
ma'am.
8.
Tama.
So
29.
number 9.
Number 10 slash
10/29. Yung
Opo.
number 8, nagsagot
Slash
siya ng
24.
/28.
Slash 16.
Mali.
Slash 16.
Okay, so the three winners should send their GCash number
Okay po.
to
Okay, thank you very much.
stop na po kasi nasabi na po ang sagot. Okay, stop na po.
Hindi naman po ito naka-share.
So, pwede na.
Meron pa bang tayong question and answer portion, ma'am?
Wala na. Next seminar na daw yon.
Time na lang kasi
Wala
masyado
na,
ng
sir.
time.
Wala na, sir. So, we will proceed with the
Awarding of certificate.
awarding of certificate.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much, our dearest participants. In order for you to receive your e-certificate, kindly answer our evaluation form, which is posted in the chat box and comment section. Your e-certificate will be then sent to you upon filling out our feedback form. Please note that for security purposes, the evaluation link will only be available for an hour after this series. Only members who submitted the evaluation form will be given the certificate. If you are not a member, the membership fee is only 50 pesos for this AY 2020-2021. Kindly coordinate with your respective faculty advisor. And now, let us move to the awarding of certificates. We would like to recognize the valuable inputs of our speaker by awarding our e-certificate. And let me read the citation. Integrated Southern Tagalog Association of Information Technology Education, ABET Innovation Awardee 2020. Certificate of Appreciation is awarded to Dr. Corazon B. Ribon from Colegio de San Juan de Letran, Calamba, for having been the resource speaker in the 7th webinar with the topic IPv4 Subnetting, an introduction, and how does it work? Given this 27th day of February 2021 via Zoom. Signed by Dr. Rosalie B. Elday, iSITE President. Thank you very much, Dr. Corazon Rebon. Let us give her a virtual round of applause. Again, thank you very much to our beloved speaker, Dr. Corazon B. Rebon, sa inyong lahat na umattend, to all of the students, all of the advisors, to Sir Lupel, all of the iSITE members, thank you very much for making this occasion and this webinar very successful. In behalf of iSITE, this is Dr. Neil Balba. I would like to say thank you so much and see you again in the next seminar series. Stay safe and have a good day. God bless you all.
I pray you'll be alright.
Bye-bye.
Nag-out agad ni Sir Lopel.
Congratulations